Hello and welcome. My name is Amy Sayre. I'm the Student Assistance Program Counselor at Shelburne Community School, and I'm here today with Rachel Petraska, School Counselor for the middle school at Shelburne Community School, and Debby Haskins, who is a training facilitator for the Center for Health and Learning and a licensed drug and alcohol counselor. Debby does trainings throughout the state on suicide prevention, so I'm so excited to be able to be here today to talk with both of them about this important topic, two people who have a lot of experience in helping families with this important topic. So we're going to start out our second session here talking about some data to help sort of ground us in what we're actually talking about as far as statistics for Vermont, and specifically the Champlain Valley School District. We'll give both middle school and high school information so that everybody sort of understands what we're talking about as far as statistics in this community. And so one that I'd like to zero in on first here is, well, actually, let me back up for a second and talk about what the Youth Risk Behavior Survey is. Rachel, if you wouldn't mind explaining for folks what exactly the Youth Risk Behavior Survey is.
Sure.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so the Youth Risk Behavior Survey has been around for quite a long time, actually. I'm not even sure how many years. But it's a survey that we give in Champlain Valley School District, schools across the state of Vermont, as well as schools across the nation. And it's a survey that asks students questions. It's really around safety, it's around health, it's around behaviors around safety and health, and it gives schools some data to be able to focus in on. Areas that we can then say, oh, these areas of health, we want to maybe brush up on these in our curriculum, or in our prevention programs. So it's great information for schools to have, and it lets us know of these really important areas that students may be struggling in around health and wellness.
Great, thank you. Sorry. And if anyone at home would like to find the full YRBS survey, you can do that on the Vermont Department of Health website. We're going to focus specifically on the areas that focus on suicide prevention today. And one specific that we'll start off with here is that Debbie's, in our community, 13% of students report that they felt so sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks in a row that they stopped doing some of their usual daily activities. Could you talk to us a little bit more about what that means?
As Rachel was talking about, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey gathers the data, and it's been around for about 25, 30 years now. And what really helps us understand, and I was talking to Rachel at the break, is that that's about 100 youth here in this district who are feeling sad or hopeless for more than 2 weeks. And that's actually a clinical definition. When you're stopped doing something normal, that's a clinical definition that depression is happening. So each one of those young people are going to respond differently to that depression or to that sadness, but we need to be aware of it. And as educators and as family members, we're going to probably see it before anyone else. So that's a precursor to the potential of being a risk factor for suicide.
Right. And we did talk in our first section a little bit about risk factors, but would you mind just real quick just running through some of those key risk factors that we should pay attention to?
Risk factors are anything that actually exacerbate a problem. So I might be a young person and I might struggle with substance abuse, or I might be moving a lot, or I might be socially isolated, or I might have difficulty with anxiety. I might be just struggling with who I am and figuring out, what my sexuality is. All of those are risk factors. But a warning sign is something more. A warning sign is actually when I start talking about suicide, when I start giving away my possessions, when I start really thinking that I say things like, I don't want to be here anymore. Those are all warning signs. That means I'm not only thinking about suicide, I may even have a plan. And so those risk factors, coupled with other things, meaning availability. One of the things that we talk a lot about in suicide prevention is suicide, the actual thought of taking our own life, is a very short window. And parents need to understand that is I may be thinking about it, but not wanting to act on it. But if I am thinking about acting on it, in that time frame, I need to make sure I'm safe. And that really is what our job as a parent is to make sure our children are safe, our youth are safe. So I want to make sure all lethal means are not available. Everything from where the guns are locked, to knives, to all kinds of avenues. I also want to think if my young person is a teenager and they're driving, that they don't have access to a car maybe during that time. So we know that lethal means matters because we can actually make an intervention and make a difference. So I'm thinking that I'm feeling very sad, but I don't have any way to do anything about it. The other two things I just want to mention about risk factors is a concussion can be a risk factor because it actually impacts the way the brain works. So if my young person has had a sports injury or fallen from a skateboard or skiing, I need to know that that can last for a year. We know that other medications can actually impact and be a risk factor, and we know, of course, you've heard me mention several times, substance abuse. Not only alcohol, but marijuana is the extreme potency that marijuana is being here in Vermont, that's being offered and used by youth, is causing psychosis and exacerbating illnesses, mental illnesses, such as depression and anxiety. So if I've got a young person with some risk factors who's also got some of these other physical risk factors, it's a warning sign.
Right.
And I really need to do something about it.
Right. And Rachel and I, in our Skills for Life classes with our middle level students at Shelburne Community School, we talk a lot about, and have this year talked a lot with them about social isolation. I don't know if you might want to mention the curriculum that we were working on.
Absolutely. Yeah, so to start our year, we started with a curriculum that we haven't used before. It's called Start with Hello, and it's a curriculum that is put out by the Sandy Hook Coalition, and it is really all about social isolation. And we know that is also a risk factor for suicide. And it was incredibly well received. What we liked about the program, this curriculum, there was an elementary component, a middle school component, and there's also a high school component as well. And the response that we got from students was incredibly positive, because we've all felt isolated at times, and oftentimes it's fleeting, but for some kids it's not. And for some youth, it's more significant. And our students know who some of those youth are, and we do too, but not always. And I think it allowed them to be able to really reflect on their own feelings of social isolation, but also, how can I help others? And if I'm concerned about somebody, and even if they're not my friend, what can I do about it? I can talk to my trusted adult. I've got to reach out. It's all of our responsibility to take care of each other. We're all in this together. That was, basically the message of the curriculum. And it really seemed like it flowed really nicely right into suicide prevention.
Because we know that belonging is huge. If kids don't feel belonging, and as you're talking, Rachel, that's absolutely one of the core components of, and what we know now when suicides happen is we often hear how isolated they were, whether it was in their room or within their family. And had people come together and talked about that, they might have seen it as a collective group. So you're absolutely right. We all have a piece to this that we need to really focus in on.
And that we need to pay attention to the feelings that these kids are having and not sort of fluff them off onto the side as being dramatic or something like that. If there's attention-seeking behavior in any way, we need to pay attention to it and recognize that that they're hurting and struggling, and be able to help them as best that we can.
I like to say to parents, if parents will say to me, well, oh, are they just seeking attention? Yes, and give it to them, and give it to them positively, and it needs to be consistent. And I know that schools have policies in place for that very reason, is that every time you either talk about hurting yourself or harming yourself or someone else, we're going to pay attention to that, because something's going on. And they don't know how to cope with it. And this is really about coping. I'm showing this behavior because I don't know how to cope.
Debbie, could you talk a little bit about depression, just in the sense of, for some, every once in a while Amy and I will get a question around depression. Well, is my child really depressed? And, do I take that seriously?
I think you always take change seriously, and it could be, depression shows up in many different ways. Males tend to be angry sometimes and actually project it outwards, and females sometimes take it inwardly. Sometimes they're not eating, sometimes they may be cutting. There's lots of different coping skills that people use when they're feeling sad. So my first line is always, you need to get your youth to a doctor. You need to let them have that discussion with them, because it may be clinical and it may be chemical. and there may be something going on more than. So let's get it checked out. And I was thinking about this on the way over is, you know, I don't take care of my car myself. I actually, you know how to check the oil and do some things, but I go to experts when I want an expert opinion. And I think sometimes as parents, we think that that's not okay. And I really think that getting someone to the doctor, because a doctor can shut the door and have a conversation with your youth that you might not have, and they might send you out the room, but that's okay. So we need to flush out whether it is true sadness over an event, or something chemical.
Yeah, thanks for explaining that, because I think that's really helpful.
It is hard.
Yeah, it's hard, and hard for parents.
And thank you both so much for this time together today. We are going to be having 2 more conversations about this important topic, so I hope that folks will tune in and get as much information from these 2 professionals as possible, because as much information as we can get about this topic, the better. So thank you all so much, and please feel free to reach out to any of your school counselors should you have any further questions or just want to have a one-on-one conversation about this as well. Thank you.